Welcome back, everyone, as we head into the home stretch of Napoleon's Marshals. We're going to take a look at episode 5 today. If you haven't seen the first 4 episodes of my reaction to this series, the link is in the description. I definitely encourage you to check out Epic History. They have a lot of fantastic content, especially related to the Napoleonic Wars. If that's something you're interested in, that's the best place to go to find it. I want to give a shout out to Caden. Thank you for signing up as a patron just a couple of weeks ago. Really appreciate your support on Patreon. We're going to be into numbers 6, 5, and 4 today. This is a long one, so buckle in, grab your popcorn, go to the bathroom occasionally, do whatever you got to do. Let's dive into this one.
6. Marshal Suchet.
Now that's high praise there, because Spain was notoriously kind of Napoleon's Vietnam, that and of course Russia. If I'd had 2 marshals like Suchet, I would not only have conquered Spain, but kept it. High praise.
Louis Gabriel Suchet was born in Lyon, the son of a prosperous silk merchant. Plans to join the family business were derailed by the French Revolution. Suchet, an ardent Republican, joined the cavalry of the Lyon National Guard. In 1793, he was elected to lead a volunteer battalion, and at the Siege of Toulon distinguished himself by helping to capture the British commander.
So here's another guy whose rise happens when Napoleon's rise happens. He is on the right side of the French Revolution to get promotion. He's not a military guy by background, but he's at Toulon, which is where Napoleon makes a name for himself. So seems like a lot of these higher ranking marshals in their standings seem to have those connections to Toulon.
General O'Hara.
Speaking of, O'Hara has the distinction of being the only guy to surrender to Napoleon and to George Washington. It was O'Hara that was the second in command to Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown, and when Cornwallis was indisposed, it was O'Hara who actually had to surrender.
He also made friends with a young Major Bonaparte. Suchet went on to serve under Napoleon in his first brilliant campaign in Italy, fighting at Lodi, Castiglione and Bassano. Transferred to Massena's division, he led his battalion with distinction at Arcole and Rivoli, was wounded twice and promoted colonel.
This is interesting because by the time you get to 1796, some of these other marshals are already leading divisions, and this guy's leading a battalion.
It was in Italy that Suchet learned the most valuable lesson of his career. For troops to be effective, they must be properly paid, clothed, and fed.
Which was something Napoleon's army didn't really have in Italy.
Something the French Republic consistently failed to achieve. Despite proving himself to be an excellent organizer and dependable in battle, Suchet never quite made it into General Bonaparte's inner circle. He went on to serve as a highly effective chief of staff to General Brune, and then to Massena in Switzerland, and was with Joubert in Italy, who died in his arms at the Battle of Novi. Suchet was promoted to General of Division, and in 1800 he was given command of the Army of Italy's left wing. With Massena besieged by the Austrians in Genoa, the defense of southern France fell on his shoulders.
It's pretty impressive to go from leading a battalion to leading the left wing of an army in just a couple of years in the same region of fighting.
In a brilliant independent campaign, he held the Austrians near Nice, then chased them back into Italy, taking 15,000 prisoners. Despite this impressive record, Suchet was not on the list of marshals created by Napoleon in 1804. Worse, in 1805, he was effectively demoted, being given command of a division in Marshal Lannes's 5th Corps.
That's something we don't see very often, are guys that are rising, and then get bumped back down. That hasn't happened a lot.
Nevertheless, it was a role he performed with great skill. His division distinguished itself at Ulm and Austerlitz, and the next year led the attack in Napoleon's crushing victory over the Prussians at Jena. The next year, in Poland, his division saw hard fighting at Pultusk, but was then held back to defend Warsaw and missed the great battles of Eylau and Friedland. Napoleon heaped rewards on General Suchet, money, titles, but still no Marshal's bateau. In 1808, Suchet's division was sent to Spain, where he'd spend the next 6 years.
Wow. Not too many of those guys spent 6 years in Spain. If he was there for 6 years, that means he was there during the rise and fall of everything. And while Napoleon's marching off to Russia and fighting at places like Leipzig, he's over here in Spain.
His first role was to support the siege of Zaragoza. Then, on Marshal Lannes's recommendation, Napoleon gave him command of 3rd Corps and made him governor of Aragon. Suchet found his troops to be poorly supplied, ill-disciplined and low in morale. Their first battle together against General Blake's Spanish army ended in a humiliating rout at Alcañiz.
Kind of par for the course for the French in Spain.
Suchet found the drummer who'd started the panic and had him shot in front of the entire corps.
That's hardcore.
He then reorganized his troops and restored discipline and pride with 2 quick victories over the Spanish. He also faced a guerrilla war in Aragon, a popular insurgency driven by hatred of the French invader.
And I can imagine if he was willing to execute one of his own drummers for starting a panic, I imagine he probably cracked down pretty hard on the insurgency.
Suchet drew on French experience of fighting counter-revolutionary insurgents in the Vendée, and realized that it was only by winning over the civilian population that he'd be able to make progress.
That is not what I expected.
He made it his first priority to ensure his own men were properly paid and fed, something almost unheard of for French troops in Spain. He enforced discipline and made sure requisitioned supplies were paid for.
So this is a great point, though. It's not even a focus yet on the enemy. Right now, you're worried about your own house. You can't fight a insurgency in a hostile foreign land if you're having trouble among your own men. So you've got to get them focused, got to get them incentivized, you've got to get them behind what you're doing before you can even start worrying about winning over the populace.
He told his troops, "I will look after your well-being, and you, by your discipline, will give security to the inhabitants. You will make them, by your conduct, care for the government of King Joseph."
Hearts and minds, hearts and minds.
He told the Spanish people, "My troops will not impede your harvests nor overcrowd your cities. They will live in the countryside, ready to protect you. Religion and clergy will be respected."
And this was a policy that Napoleon had in general, is that it's really hard to get a handle on what Napoleon actually believed when it comes to religion, because he was a guy who was willing to embrace religion for the political benefits. So when he's in Egypt, for example, he embraces Islam, and he recognizes its importance in connecting to the people and keeping them in line, and the same thing's happening here. So he kind of negotiates with the Catholic Church to make sure, hey, listen, we'll let your people do your thing, just honor us, honor the government, don't give us any trouble. And he kind of saw the role that it played.
Crucially, Suchet also promised protection from the many Spanish guerrilla bands who behaved no better than bandits. His practical and humane approach won respect and brought results. The guerrillas could never be completely defeated, but Suchet made Aragon the safest and best-run region in occupied Spain.
That says a lot.
He extended French control of eastern Spain with a series of successful sieges at Lérida, Mequinenza and Tortosa. In June 1811, he took Tarragona. For this victory, Napoleon finally awarded him his Marshal's baton, the only one earned in Spain.
And interesting, because after Jena, he's not really serving with Napoleon. Napoleon's got him off in Spain, but for somebody to get one for action in Spain, impressive.
Then he moved south. He defeated a larger Spanish force at Saguntum, then took the great city of Valencia, along with 18,000 prisoners and nearly 500 guns. Napoleon rewarded Suchet with the title Duke of Albufera. But the overall situation in Spain was deteriorating steadily.
Yeah, and no matter how good he's doing, if it's not going well elsewhere, it's an untenable situation, as we know.
The partisans became better organized and supplied. The British Navy was able to land troops on the coast to make diversionary attacks, while Napoleon withdrew more and more units for his own campaigns in Russia and Germany. After King Joseph and Jourdan were defeated at Vitoria, Suchet had no option but to pull back towards the French frontier, leaving behind several well-supplied garrisons. On Napoleon's abdication, Suchet remained undefeated, still holding the French frontier.
Wow.
When Napoleon returned from exile, Suchet went to meet him in Paris. It was the first time they'd met in person in 8 years.
Wow. So he hadn't seen him since he had been made a marshal. It's only on his return right before Waterloo that he actually sees Napoleon face to face after getting his marshal's baton. I tell you what, obviously I said a few episodes ago, we talked about Spain being the place that careers go to die in Napoleon's army. Not so with Suchet, apparently.
Marshal Suchet, you have grown greatly since we last saw one another, the Emperor told him. He entrusted Suchet with command of French forces in the south, an important independent command for which few men were better suited.
And that we've said that before as well, is that certain guys are good with someone right over them, commanding a corps under Napoleon, and they operate well in that system. But there are few people that it seems Napoleon trusted enough regularly with independent command without him.
Suchet dutifully kept France's enemies at bay until news arrived of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo.
I would say, I'm going to guess that Suchet's career is basically over at that point, because he didn't, it wasn't unambiguous. He was, he was ambiguous, I should say. What I'm trying to say is he sided with Napoleon very strongly. A lot of these guys kind of stayed in the middle, played both sides, went to the side of the monarchy when the king was restored after Napoleon was exiled the first time.
During the Second Bourbon Restoration, Suchet was dismissed and retired to his country estate, where he died in 1826. He was still held in such esteem in Aragon that a mass was held to pray for his soul in the Cathedral of Zaragoza.
Wow, that's impressive.
Suchet was a brilliant commander, widely regarded as the best administrator in Napoleon's army.
I can see that.
He was also one of the few who thrived with the responsibility of independent command. He never had the opportunity to prove himself on the war's decisive battlegrounds.
That's the thing. He's not fighting over there in Europe, in like Russia and Germany and in some of these places leading high commands. Doesn't mean he wouldn't have done well.
But when Napoleon, in exile on St. Helena, was asked to name his best general, he replied, "That is difficult to say, but it seems to me that it is Suchet."
Doesn't get more high praise than that.
Marshal Ney.
This might be his most famous marshal. Oh, wow. Ney was priceless for his valor, his obstinacy in retreats. He was good for leading 10,000 men. Otherwise, he was a true idiot. And let me tell you what, the guy who plays Ney in the movie Waterloo looks just like him. Like the minute you see him on screen, you know it's Marshal Ney.
Marshal Ney was a cooper's son from Lorraine, a German-speaking region of France on the eastern frontier.
And this is that area, Alsace and Lorraine, or in German I think it's called Lotharingia, named after Lothar, who, when they divided it into, in the aftermath of Charlemagne, you have West Francia, Middle Francia, East Francia. Middle Francia is Lotharingia. It's this area in the middle here. It'd be basically Belgium and eastern France and a little bit of Germany. But yeah, this is the area that gets fought over constantly between Germany and France. And it's the land that's going to go to Germany in the aftermath of the Franco-Prussian War. It's the land that's going to go back to France after the First World War.
His father wanted him to become a clerk, but the young Ney, impetuous and headstrong, joined a hussar regiment instead. He soon distinguished himself as a fine horseman and fencer, and was a senior sergeant by the time of the French Revolution. When war broke out, Ney was made an officer, and became aide-de-camp to General Lamarche.
It's always a good stepping stone to be an aide to a general, especially a general that might have some influence.
His reports describe Ney as active, brave, and a skilled tactician. Ney served in the Netherlands and on the Rhine, fighting at Valmy, Jemappes, and near Winden. He was seriously wounded once and captured once. Fellow officers nicknamed Ney the Indefatigable. His men preferred Le Rougeau, the ruddy or red-faced. The 30-year-old Ney was now a proven brigade commander, despite refusing promotion more than once, regarding himself as unqualified.
That's interesting, and that says something about the guy. I think of people like Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain in the American Civil War, somebody who, at every level he commanded, proved himself capable, but who also, when the war first broke out and he goes to get a commission, is offered command of a regiment, and he says, I need to learn the business first. And he accepts second in command so he can learn. Sometimes it's fear of not wanting to mess up and being afraid of failure, that kind of thing. Sometimes it's a real recognition that, listen, if I want to do this, I want to do it right, and that means I need to learn by doing. And so in Ney's case, that seems to have been the case.
In 1799, following glowing reports from General Bernadotte, he finally accepted the rank of General of Division. In 1800, Ney and his division played a major role in General Moreau's great victory over the Austrians at Hohenlinden. This brought him to the attention of France's new first consul, Napoleon Bonaparte, with whom he'd still never served. When they met in Paris, they warmed to each other. Napoleon entrusted Ney the delicate task of imposing his act of mediation on Switzerland.
Yeah, so they try to do this a couple different ways. They first try to negotiate with Switzerland. When that doesn't go well, he basically sends in the army to negotiate a little more forcefully.
She carried out with swift efficiency. The same year, Ney married Aglaé Louise Augier, a friend of Josephine's daughter, Hortense, now Napoleon's stepdaughter, drawing him closer to France's future imperial family. In 1804, Napoleon proclaimed a new empire, and Ney was made a marshal. The next year, he was leading 6th Corps to war against Austria. He was accompanied by Colonel Henri Jomini, a Swiss officer and military theorist. Ney had been quick to recognize his talent, giving him a job as his aide-de-camp and helping to publish his work. Jomini would win fame as one of the 19th century's great military thinkers.
Yeah, and a lot of times these guys that maybe haven't had a chance to prove themselves as battlefield commanders yet, they prove themselves as kind of a desk commander, working on a staff like this. That's what Alexander Hamilton did, serving under George Washington. That's what George C. Marshall did in the First World War as the chief of staff for General Pershing. Marshall basically was given the opportunity to plan all the Army's movements late in the war at places like Saint-Mihiel, and then the big movement over to Meuse-Argonne, which was a brilliant maneuver. That was all planned by George C. Marshall, who's a staff guy.
And served Ney well as his chief of staff on several campaigns. During the advance against the Austrians, Jomini encouraged Ney to ignore orders from Marshal Murat that would have allowed the enemy to escape. Their decision was vindicated when 6th Corps won a brilliant action at Elchingen, that closed the trap on General Mack's forces at Ulm. Ney's corps missed the Battle of Austerlitz, but was in action against the Prussians the following year. There had already been signs that Ney's aggressive instinct, which made him a brilliant tactical leader, could also get him into trouble.
And this is why, as I said earlier, sometimes you have people that are good in their role as long as you've got a stabilizing influence above them. If you have somebody who's super aggressive, that can be useful as long as there's somebody over them to rein them in when necessary.
At the Battle of Jena, Ney ignored his orders and charged straight at the Prussian lines, becoming cut off. His troops
There's a lot of battles that get lost because people do things like that, even when they're otherwise winning.
had to be rescued by Marshal Lannes' corps. A furious Napoleon remarked, "Ney knows less about soldiering than the last-joined drummer boy."
Ouch.
Ney was criticised again by Napoleon 3 months later, when his foraging raids into East Prussia appeared to provoke a Russian offensive. The winter manoeuvring culminated in the horrific Battle of Eylau, which Ney's corps reached only as darkness fell. That summer, Bennigsen's Russian army launched a surprise attack, hoping to encircle and destroy Ney's 6th Corps near Gutstadt. Ney, outnumbered 4-1, conducted a brilliant fighting withdrawal and escaped the trap. A week later, Napoleon caught Bennigsen's army at Friedland. Ney led a crucial attack on the enemy. "That man is a lion," said Napoleon, watching his advance.
So, when he's an idiot, he's a real idiot, but when he fights well, he's a lion. Ney strikes me as a high-risk, high-reward kind of guy. Man, he can win big when he wins, but when he doesn't, it's ugly.
6th Corps' onslaught shattered the Russian left, leading to one of Napoleon's most decisive victories. For all his flaws, Ney had proved himself one of Napoleon's best tactical commanders, and was rewarded with the title Duke of Elchingen. In 1808, Ney commanded a corps during the invasion of Spain. He spent more than 2 years in the Iberian Peninsula, and like most of Napoleon's marshals, found it a bitter and frustrating experience. In 1810, he joined Marshal Massena for the invasion of Portugal, but deeply resented being placed under his command. He criticised every decision, helping to create a poisonous atmosphere at French headquarters.
Doesn't do any good. In that kind of situation, the last thing you need is infighting in a place like Spain. We talked about that already, too.
The French advance on Lisbon came to a halt at the lines of Torres Vedras. During the subsequent retreat, Ney again demonstrated his brilliant tactical skills, fighting a series of rearguard actions that kept Wellington's troops at bay. But Ney's fury at what he considered Massena's disastrous leadership boiled over into open insubordination. He was relieved of command and returned to France. But he did not remain in disgrace for long. Napoleon knew Ney's worth in battle, and that the army adored him.
And that he's very unlikely to be the same way with Napoleon that he was in Portugal.
He'd been needed in Russia, and was recalled in 1812 with command of 3rd Corps. As the Grande Armée advanced deeper into Russia, Ney was always near the action, leading attacks at Krasny and at Smolensk, where he was wounded in the neck. Amid the slaughter of Borodino, Ney led his corps in attack after attack on the Russian earthworks. When they were finally taken, and he was told that Napoleon would not send in his reserves to follow up their hard-won gains, he exploded with anger. What business has the Emperor in the rear of the army? Since he will no longer make war himself, let him return to the Tuileries and leave us to be generals for him.
This guy did not have much of a filter when it came to what he thought of his higher-ups, did he?
It was typical of Ney's lack of restraint. But his blind faith in the Emperor did not survive Russia. Henceforth, he'd fight only for France. It was during the retreat from Moscow that Ney ensured his place among the legends of military history. Just 2 weeks into the retreat, the Russians routed Davout's rearguard at Vyazma, and Ney and Third Corps took over. Ney was not only an instinctive tactician and apparently immune to fear or fatigue, he could inspire or bully other men into superhuman feats of bravery and endurance.
That is one of the benefits of an impulsive type of guy. I see a lot of parallels with him and a guy like Patton. Patton wasn't as insubordinate like Ney is, and he knew his place when it came to his connection to his higher ups. He could be brash, he could say things he shouldn't have said, he could bully people that were under him or that were equal to him, but he typically respected his higher ups. But same kind of thing. This is a guy that you need somebody who can rein them in when necessary, but can inspire superhuman feats out of men at times.
A French officer later recalled, "I can see him still at the spot where the fighting was hottest, speaking to the men, indicating to the generals what positions they should take up, animating all hearts with the confidence that flashed from his glances. He made an effect on me I don't know how to describe."
And that is the kind of thing that you can't quantify and you can't put into words, is that kind of, well, the French would call it je ne sais quoi. I don't know what, but you know it when you see it.
At Krasny, when the rear guard got cut off from the rest of the army, Ney angrily rejected calls to surrender and led his men in an astonishing forced march across enemy territory, crossing the frozen Dnieper River at night, personally pulling men from the river when they fell through the ice. Surrounded by Cossacks and down to 800 fighting men, they formed square and kept moving. Ney was more than a hero to the army. He was its talisman. News of his escape caused rejoicing throughout the army. Napoleon himself remarked, "What a soldier! The army is full of brave men, but Marshal Ney is truly the bravest of the brave." Ney led the rearguard for the rest of the retreat, and according to legend, was the last man to cross the Niemen River into Poland.
Wow.
His leadership helped many thousands of soldiers to make it back alive. Ney was rewarded with the title Prince of the Moskva, and continued to serve throughout 1813, though his relations with the Emperor, and Marshal Berthier in particular, were increasingly strained. At Lützen, Ney was moved by the conduct of his young conscripts, who bore the brunt of Blücher's surprise attack, but fought back bravely, helping to win victory. Napoleon then entrusted Ney with command of 3 army corps, 84,000 men.
The guy that Napoleon said, and maybe he hadn't said it yet, was good with 10,000 men, but otherwise he was an idiot. He's got 84,000 here.
But the plan for him to fall on the enemy's flank at Bautzen went awry. Badly drafted orders led to delay, and the coalition army was able to escape. Ney fought in the Emperor's great victory at Dresden, but 10 days later at Dennewitz, his limitations as an army commander were horribly exposed. Throwing himself into an attack, he lost control of the battle, and was badly beaten by Bernadotte's Army of the North.
Fighting against Bernadotte. Yeah, this is not a guy who is independent as a commander, not like Suchet.
Ney was devastated by his defeat, but Napoleon kept him in command of his northern wing. At the gigantic 4-day Battle of Leipzig, he commanded the northern sector, holding the line until a shoulder wound on the last day forced his return to France. He rejoined the army in 1814 and fought in the defense of France, commanding the Young Guard, and personally leading a bayonet charge at the Battle of Montmirail. In April, Ney, outspoken as ever, was among the first to confront Napoleon with the reality of his position.
And here's the thing. Obviously, Ney, we know he has a history of this, but you saw just before this, he's leading a bayonet charge in the defense of France, even though at that point I think everybody knew that this was a losing proposition. So it's not like he's going to Napoleon and seizing an opportunity. He has fought to the end until it's clear to everybody that this is over.
And force his abdication. Ney was feted by the restored Bourbon monarchy as France's greatest soldier, but he could not hide his contempt for the returning aristocrats who treated his family with disdain. When the king's niece reduced his wife to tears, Ney confronted her, shouting, "I and others were fighting for France, while you sat sipping tea in English gardens."
Good for him.
In February 1815, Napoleon escaped from exile on Elba and landed in France.
And this is one of the most iconic moments when it comes to Ney. This is kind of one of the things I always think about when I think of him, is what went down in 1815.
Ney was horrified by the prospect of civil war and promised the king that he'd bring Napoleon back to Paris in an iron cage.
Talking a big game, buddy.
But he soon saw that the army was flocking to Napoleon's banner. When Napoleon appealed to him directly as the hero of Borodino, Ney made the fateful decision to cast in his lot with the Emperor once more. When
Faithful
Napoleon
indeed.
advanced into the Netherlands in June to take on Wellington and Blücher's armies, Ney commanded his left wing. But he made a string of blunders. Against Wellington's troops at Quatre Bras, he was too cautious when he held the advantage. 2 days later at Waterloo, Napoleon left much of the tactical handling of the battle to Marshal Ney. It was a mistake.
And again, listen, we talk about this a lot, but Waterloo was not the big turning point, decisive moment. Obviously, it was, because the Anglo-Allied and then the Prussian army that comes in defeat Napoleon and put an end to his reign once and for all. But had Napoleon won, and he very nearly did win the Battle of Waterloo, long term it wouldn't have changed the outcome.
On his own initiative, Ney launched a series of mass cavalry attacks too early and failed to launch any coordinated attacks on Wellington's position.
And this is why, and to criticize Napoleon is fair here. Napoleon knew who Ney was at this point, and to give him that kind of carte blanche to do this kind of thing without reining him in.
Till late in the day. He had 4 horses killed under him, and personally led the last doomed attack by the Imperial Guard. Ney's courage that day was awe-inspiring, but his decisions helped to cause the French defeat.
Doesn't matter how brave you are if you're also stupid.
In the aftermath, Ney spurned several chances to flee France and was arrested for treason by the restored monarchy. A military court refused to pass sentence, so his case went to the Chamber of Peers. With the king's allies demanding that an example be made of Ney, the outcome of his trial was never in doubt. 5 of Ney's fellow marshals were among a large majority who voted for the death penalty.
Wow.
On the 7th...
So you've got Kellerman, Marmont, Perignon, Serrurier, and Victor.
of December 1815, he was marched into the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris. "Soldiers, when I give the order to fire, fire at the heart," he told the firing squad. "Wait for the order, it will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have fought 100 battles for France,
Not one
and
against
not
her.
one against her."
He's right. His crime was that he betrayed the monarchy, the king, the Bourbon monarchy.
Marshal Ney was among the most inspirational battlefield commanders in history. A born soldier and brilliant tactician, unless his fiery temperament got the better of him. He lacked the confidence for high command, but under the Emperor's supervision, he proved one of the Grande Armée's greatest combat leaders.
But he needed to be kept on a tighter leash than Napoleon at times kept him on, and that was his undoing.
4. Marshal Soult.
I should have made a great example and had Soult shot. He was the greatest pillager of them all.
Jean de Dieu Soult was from a small town in southern France. And
that's an interesting name, Jean de Dieu, Jean of God. Interesting.
Régiment Royal, aged 16. He became a tough, capable sergeant, and in the build-up to the Revolutionary Wars, joined a new battalion of volunteers as their drill instructor. Soult's self-confidence and bearing meant he was soon made an officer. The unit went into action against the Prussians in 1793. In a brutal baptism of fire, half the battalion became casualties, though Soult's own conduct was praised. After a spell on the staff of General Hoche, he joined General Lefebvre's crack Vanguard Division. Soult learned much from Lefebvre, a future fellow marshal, serving first as his chief of staff and later as his best brigade commander.
You see, again, there's that chief of staff. That's kind of that stepping stone to let someone in high command see how you operate, how you think, to use them as a sounding board. And it, you know, another great example I think of is a guy like George Custer. Custer's a staff officer. He's a captain. And in 1863, he's promoted all the way to brigadier general because generals had seen enough of what he could do in terms of talking about the battles and serving on a staff that they wanted to see what he would do out on the field.
Soult's rise from sergeant to brigadier general took less than 3 years. In the process, he won a reputation as an organized and decisive commander and brilliant tactician. He also began a bitter, long-lasting feud with another rising star, General Marshal Ney.
Why do I feel like Ney probably feuded with a lot of people?
In 1799, Soult established himself as one of France's best divisional commanders, fighting under Massena's command at the Battle of Zurich.
It's amazing how many of these guys fought under Massena as well.
He was then put in charge of 3 divisions to pursue General Suvorov through the Alps, proving his ability for high command. In his report to France's new first consul, Napoleon Bonaparte, Massena wrote, "For judgment and courage, Soult has scarcely a superior." The next year, Soult and Massena were besieged in Genoa. Soult led a series of daring raids on the Austrian lines, until he was shot in the knee and captured.
I led a bunch of raids until I took an arrow to the knee.
Robbed
or a bullet in this
days
case.
in agony in a filthy hospital. An episode that may explain Soult's later reluctance to lead from the front.
Yeah, you know, I mean, some guys can be really brave and super great soldiers and generals and leaders. Something like that can mess with your psyche. It can cause you to not be as brave. Some guys can brush that off and move forward. Others, that trauma happens and they're never the same afterward.
His return to Paris, Soult received a hero's welcome from Napoleon. His rewards included an honorary rank as Colonel General in the Consular Guard, plus command of troops assembled at Saint-Omer for Napoleon's planned invasion of England. Soult, the old drill instructor, imposed strict discipline and trained his men hard, earning the nickname Bras de Fer, Iron Arm. Even Napoleon wondered if he was being too severe, to which Soult replied, "Those that can't handle what I myself endure will be left behind in the depots. Those that can will be fit to conquer the world."
That's hardcore. I like it.
In 1804, Napoleon proclaimed his new empire, and Soult received his Marshal's baton. The next year, his impeccably drilled troops became 4th Corps, the largest corps of the Grande Armée, and marched east to take on the 3rd Coalition. That December at Austerlitz, Napoleon entrusted Soult's corps with the main attack on the enemy centre. As he issued his final orders to his marshals, the Emperor turned to Soult last and said, "As for you, Soult, I say only, act as you always do."
So this is all really interesting because obviously, I mean, Austerlitz is like Napoleon's, that's like his masterclass victory, right? I mean, if you're to say, okay, show me one of the greatest generals in history at his finest, you look at Austerlitz, and not the version shown in the movie, but what actually happened. We did a whole video on that. It's definitely worth checking out. The whole scheme here is that you're drawing the enemy into believing that they've run you off with a false kind of pullback while you launch the main attack somewhere else. Everything relies on Soult's attack being successful, and to give him no more instructions than just do what you do says a lot. Not only that he was given this command, but also that Napoleon just said, be yourself.
Fourth Corps' attack was the decisive blow of the battle, though its success owed much to Soult's exceptional divisional commanders, Saint-Hilaire and Van Damme.
It's never just one guy. This stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. Napoleon doesn't win his successes without competent command at lower levels, and these corps commanders the same way.
With victory won, Napoleon acclaimed Soult the foremost maneuverer in Europe. However, it was observed that Soult was now less inclined to expose himself to enemy fire, taking a more managerial approach to command, though his planning, organisation and tactical instinct remained superb. The next year, Soult's corps played an important role at the Battle of Jena, and in the pursuit of the defeated Prussian army that followed. In the brutal winter battle at Eylau, his troops held the centre of the line. Soult's relationship with Napoleon was excellent, and the Emperor frequently turned to him for advice, much to Marshal Berthier's annoyance.
Yeah, when Berthier's the chief of staff, it's probably not going to sit well with him that Napoleon's looking to other people to tell him things that you would expect the chief of staff to be filling him in on.
In 1808, Soult was ennobled as the Duke of Dalmatia, and later that year led a corps in Napoleon's invasion of Spain. When the Emperor returned to France, he entrusted the pursuit of the British army to Marshal Soult. The British nicknamed Soult the Duke of Damnation, and he harried them through the mountains of Galicia to La Coruña. But in battle, he could not break their lines, nor prevent their escape by sea. Soult then marched south and occupied Porto, where rumours began that he was considering crowning himself King of Portugal.
Interesting. Well, I am curious to know why in this case, maybe it's the timing of when this happened. They're showing Wellington as Wellesley here, which was his actual surname. Wellington was his title. Maybe he hadn't been given the Duke of Wellington yet.
Whether the rumours were serious or not, in May the British and Portuguese took Soult by surprise and drove him out of Portugal with heavy loss in men and supplies. This was the most ignominious chapter of Soult's mixed record in the peninsula. 5 years that saw sparks of brilliance, but also missed chances, shocking avarice, and a reluctance to cooperate with other commanders.
The graveyard of careers. Spain and Portugal.
Later in 1809, Soult replaced Marshal Jourdan as King Joseph's chief military advisor, and led French forces to a crushing victory over the Spanish at Ocaña. He then oversaw the French occupation of southern Spain. Appointed governor of Andalusia, Soult administered the region with cold efficiency from his headquarters at Seville, though avoiding harsh measures where possible. He lived in royal style and notoriously looted Spanish churches on such a scale that he soon amassed one of the great art collections in Europe.
So contrast this with Suchet, who went out of his way to endear himself and his men to the Spanish populace. Soult's doing the opposite. He's looting, he's pillaging, he's living high on the hog. He's trying to treat them well in terms of not like doing a lot of reprisals and killing people, but he's taking what he wants.
Worth an estimated 1.5 million francs.
Jeez.
He was increasingly aloof, and even his aides found him difficult to like.
It really feels like there was a turning point when he was wounded, and this happens. It happened with John Bell Hood in the American Civil War. Some guys are just never the same.
Soult's character is hard and above all egotistical, one wrote. He takes no more than a passing interest in those around him.
He's a different guy.
In 1811, with Marshal Massena's army stalled outside Lisbon, Napoleon ordered Soult to give support. Like many of Napoleon's long-range interventions in Spain, the objectives were unrealistic. Yet Soult marched north with 20,000 men, capturing Badajoz, but withdrew on receiving news of an enemy landing near Barossa.
His concern is the territory that he is governor of, the place where he's sitting comfortable, and he's not going to try too hard to come to the support of somebody else if there's a threat to the place that he's really concerned about.
2 months later, he marched north again to relieve Badajoz, now besieged by the enemy, and met Beresford's larger army en route at Albuera. Soult launched a flanking attack that threw the enemy into confusion, but he failed to follow up his advantage and left the tactical handling of the battle to others. Nor was he on the spot to inspire his troops, and his army suffered a bloody defeat. The next year, Wellington's victory at Salamanca forced Soult to abandon his palace in Seville and retreat to Valencia. Though that autumn, he had the satisfaction of reoccupying Madrid and pursuing Wellington's army back to the Portuguese frontier. In 1813, Napoleon summoned Soult to Germany, where he fought at Lützen and supervised the main attack at Bautzen. But when news arrived of the calamitous French defeat at Vitoria, Napoleon sent Soult back to Spain.
He's like, no, don't send me back there, please.
Charge. Soult inherited a demoralized, disorganized army.
What a mess.
He quickly imposed order, turned it around, and attacked.
Think about how differently all of this turns out if two things don't happen. Number one is Spain and the other is Russia. Take those away, Napoleon's in such a great position.
It was an impressive feat, but his mostly young conscripts were up against experienced, well-led troops. 2 attempts to relieve the besieged garrison of San Sebastian failed. Soult began a fighting retreat through the Pyrenees mountains back to France. Despite the limitations of his demoralized conscripts, he ensured Wellington's army had to fight every step of the way, counter-attacking whenever possible, and offering resistance till the end, even as Napoleon's empire began to collapse. The last battle of the campaign was fought at Toulouse, a bloody and unnecessary one, as Napoleon had abdicated 4 days earlier. Under the Bourbon Restoration, Soult became an unpopular Minister of War. Like Marshal Ney, he initially opposed Napoleon's return from exile, but saw which way the wind was blowing and rallied to the Emperor. Napoleon made several dubious appointments in 1815. One was to pick Soult as his new chief of staff, replacing Marshal Berthier. Not only did this waste Soult's command abilities, since his...
Because you're taking a guy who's a field commander and you're putting him in a chief of staff role. Chief of staff's good for an up-and-coming young guy that you want to see what he can do and kind of observe him closely, not a proven battlefield commander. But maybe Napoleon recognizes Soult's not the same guy, and he wants to keep him close.
New role was merely to implement Napoleon's orders. Soult also inherited a complex staff system of Berthier's own devising. Crucial errors resulted during the Waterloo campaign, with orders going astray and commanders unsure of their role. Soult's warning not to underestimate Wellington's army was dismissed by Napoleon.
Soult had faced Wellington. He knows what he's up against. Napoleon
You
hadn't.
think that because Wellington defeated you, he must be a great general. I tell you that he is a bad general, that the English are bad troops, and this will be over by lunchtime.
Never underestimate a guy you haven't faced on the field yet, especially a guy who's won victories.
Following Napoleon's defeat, Soult lived in exile until 1819, then returned to France under a political amnesty. After the July Revolution, he served as a reforming Minister of War and 3 times as President of the Council of Ministers.
And a lot of these guys serve as Minister of War. A lot of them serve as the President of or as the head of Superintendent of Les Invalides. And this guy lives all the way to 1851. That's impressive.
Effectively France's Prime Minister. He also became the Grand Old Man of the French army, elevated to Commander-in-Chief with the exalted rank of Marshal General of France. Soult died aged 82 in the same town where he was born, known today as Saint-Amand-Soult. Soult's record as a marshal was mixed. A brilliant and intelligent organizer whose ability to deliver a master stroke or inspire his troops to victory waned with time. Yet he was one of the few marshals that Napoleon could trust with a large independent command, a quality he needed desperately, but found in short supply.
So I really feel like... go ahead and let this play out.
Ney, Soult. Join us for the final part of Napoleon's Marshals as we reveal our top 3, coming soon.
I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I really feel like we're talking about 2 different guys with Soult. We're talking about before the wound and after the wound, and there's definitely a difference. But there's a lot of other factors that might be too, and maybe I'm just missing something and I'm hyper-focused on that. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about that. But I want to give a shout-out and a thank you to Parker in Woodbury, Minnesota, and Charlie in Greenville, Tennessee. Thank you both for your support on Patreon. Couldn't do it without you. We'll see you again tomorrow with the final episode. Thanks for watching.